Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about a new ballot measure that just came out, and folks, it's a doozy. It's I suspect the people pushing it are going to say it's about election integrity, and I think a lot of even the headlines are saying it's about banning early voting, but it is so much more than that. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's really problematic and really objectionable, and by the way, it goes a lot farther beyond even just voting. Anyway, we'll talk about that later in the show. Of course, I'm joined by Wednesday co-host Ben Hanson, and also a couple of guests, Greg Tehven, who is with an organization called Emerging Prairie. He's also chairman of the Grand Farm Board of Directors. That's what we're having him on about, to talk about Grand Farm. Also, State Representative Cynthia Schreiber-Beck. She's a Republican. She's from Wahpeton. She's going to be on as well, because one of the big announcements yesterday was Grand Farm being appropriated some public money to accomplish its mission. So, Greg, Representative Schreiber-Beck, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Greg, let's start with you. Tell us, Grand Farm. The description of it's an ag innovation and research site west of Fargo. It just announced it's completed its first capital campaign. But for people who maybe don't know what this is, give us a little overview. What is Grand Farm? What's the goal here?
Happy to do that. Barry Batchelor, who is a local entrepreneur in the region. Some folks would be familiar with him for putting the first computer chip on a Steiger tractor, or building Phoenix International, which John Deere Electronic Solutions later acquired. Asked our community at one of our events here in Fargo, what's the region's major? And a small group of us got together and said it has to be advanced technology in agriculture. Our region has tremendous producers. There's great history of the formation of Bobcat or the Steiger tractor, the Concord sprayer. And a group of us got together and said, we agree, it's advanced technology in agriculture. And so a steering committee was formed to look at what are some of the solutions that can be found to address global challenges in agriculture, access to labor, on-farm safety. And we came up with the idea of Grand Farm, which was to create an independent environment for producers, early stage organizations, established organizations, policymakers, and academics to work together to use technology to solve real problems in agriculture.
Greg, thanks for coming on today. I wanted to ask you and then kick it over to Representative Schreiber-Beck. She said to call her Cindy, and I'm so used to calling you Representative. I'm sorry, it's a habit. I want to kick it over to you. Grand Farm now has received public dollars from multiple sources. Can you kind of talk about, was that part of the original plan? Is that a continued plan going forward? And then to Cindy Schreiber-Beck, I'd love to hear, where those dollars are coming from. Is this federal? Is this state? It's not always easy to keep track of where these things are, just because there's a lot of moving parts. Can you help kind of inform our audience about those things?
Yeah, did Greg want to go? Or I can certainly go.
Go ahead.
The Legislative Assembly appropriated $10 million from the Federal State Fiscal Recovery Fund, which came from the American Rescue Plan Act, and it went to the Department of Commerce. And at first, it was requiring a 1-to-1 match, is what the legislative bill had said. And that was in the 21 session. In the 23, that was in the special session of 21. In 23, the Department of Commerce was allowed then not to have, Grand Farm did not have to have the 1-to-1 match. And so that full 10 million was available to Grand.
Now, Cindy, so folks know, when you say 1-to-1, do you mean 1-to-1 federal to state dollars or federal to private dollars?
Yeah, Public-private, correct. So $1
Public-
state, what we could consider state money, although it came to the federal, and $1.
So it functions somewhat like a PPP.
Correct.
Awesome.
Greg, one thing that I thought was kind of interesting, or that is interesting about agriculture, I think, and I was just talking with somebody about this the other day. I think we were talking about like autonomous cars and everything, and people are kind of looking at that as being cutting edge. And I don't think people realize how cutting edge agriculture is. I think a lot of people, they think of agriculture and they think of a farmer farming the same way that they have since the 1960s, the 1970s or something. And people don't understand, like a lot of the early innovation in autonomous vehicles was in farming, and maybe for obvious reasons. A tractor operating in a field is a lot lower risk in a lot of ways than a vehicle trying to navigate the streets of San Francisco or something. So, I mean, agriculture has gotten really, really high tech. Why is this Grand Farm in an industry that is already bleeding, very high tech? Why is this necessary?
Well, I think it's necessary for a lot of reasons. The core function of agriculture is to feed people. And for years, there's been studies that there's going to be more people and there's not going to be any more land. Cities are growing, environments are growing, so there's going to likely be less land. The other element is there's real challenges. There's real challenges in access to labor. There's real challenges in on-farm safety. Barry Batchelor often talks about technology should do jobs that are dull, dangerous, and dirty. And turns out agriculture has a lot of them. And so we've been just blown away by some of the technology that's being developed. We were out at the Grand Farm yesterday. I think there was 100 Brazilian farmers that were on a North American tour. There was folks, there were students, there was a wide background of folks. And they were getting an opportunity to engage with some of this technology that is becoming more available. There's a couple factors going in. Access to broadband. The federal government has invested heavily in broadband. Broadband connectivity creates the access to machines, Internet of Things to connect, to be more intelligent. Then you have the emergence of equipment. So in the case of autonomous equipment, generally it's smaller equipment. So you need more smaller devices versus large pieces of equipment. And the convergence of that, the adoption of technology, the introduction of artificial intelligence, it's fascinating and it's exciting. And back to that idea of agriculture, I grew up on a family farm. I'd be the fifth generation family farmer if you describe me as a farmer or not. I'm not there yet. I don't identify in that way. But I kind of thought about my dad and my mom and their friends like, hey, they're farmers and they're super humble folks. And now I realize these are CEOs. These are people that are managing resources, creating efficiency, putting food on the table. These are the folks that are taking care of their churches and their local community. I just can't believe how incredible agriculture is and how many people participate, from equipment to mobility to strategy and finance. Agriculture is a really, really exciting industry. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to say it took me till I was 33 years old to discover all the incredible activity that's in this industry.
Well, we'll just get you on a beat truck during harvest season, and then you can like truly experience the psychology of like just being awake for 18 hours at a time driving around. Unless you already do that, I shouldn't make assumptions, Greg.
I am not one of the folks that has been called to do that, and I wasn't asked to help a lot on the farm. I think I have some limitations, so that's where autonomy could maybe make an impact.
It's good knowing your limitations. Cindy, I wanted to ask you, as far as from a legislative perspective, this has been something, this particular project has been something that the state government has been supportive of through that pass-through dollars that you spoke of. I cannot remember. Are you on the agriculture committee? And more importantly, are there other projects like this in the state or other partnerships, public-private partnerships the state is looking to do as far as ag tech goes with the ag industry?
As far as other partnerships in the ag industry, I think the only thing that we can look at, that we know is on the table now is that automated tax credit that was available up to $6 million. So we enhanced that this last session. when I look forward to the future of what's going to happen, and yes, I am on the agricultural committee. I actually have some concerns that we don't, what do we want to say? Sometimes the legislature has, they don't always look at the data to make decisions, I think, and giving some data into some of the decisions that maybe were made. As, Greg alluded to the fact there were Brazilian farmers there. Well, in obvious, statements, there's competition with our exports to China and any other place. And so China has become a word that, a country that we're not particularly fond of at this minute. Yet our agricultural industry is somewhat dependent upon the fact that we can export to them. Hopefully, we can look forward. And I think the other component to agriculture is energy. And we have to look at that and see that making sure that we can have the energy beyond the technology and improved energy sources to continue the march that we're on right now. And I don't know if that answered your question, but I also equate.
I think it does. No, go ahead.
And I equate this somewhat to, we have Grand Sky and we have Grand Farm. At first, people were a little tentative about the fact that the Grand was used in both places, and Grand, of course, synonymous with Grand Forks. But I think that we are, going forward and becoming very, very well known across probably the country and the world as far as what's happening here in North Dakota. And so in both aspects, the unmanned and the through Grand Sky, and also now unmanned or uncrewed, if you want to call it, through Grand Farm. So it's there's a lot of synergies that are being played back and forth between those two. And of course, the state has supported Grand Sky. I believe the total is getting close to 40 million. Some of it federal funds, about 17, I believe, million was federal funds. So we just want to see that happen. Plus the other aspect would be the what is happening with the enhanced use lease program up there at Grand Sky too.
Greg, Greg, one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, you mentioned something that really kind of struck or got my synapses firing, was talking about how we're going to have less land to farm in the future, which I think is both true and, one of the side effects of climate change is that it's making more northern land arable. But I think it's a point well made in that as our cities are growing, particularly here in North Dakota, the amount of land we have available to grow the food that we're eating is going to get smaller, and so we have to learn how to get more efficient out of using the land that's going to be left. I don't want to make that sound like that's a encroaching problem, but it makes me think of something. A lot of people, Norman Borlaug, who is if you don't know about this guy, you should look him up. Was the father of GMO, which allowed there was this theory. It was an economist by the name of Thomas Malthus, and he thought that eventually humanity would grow so large we would outstrip our ability to develop the amount of food to feed for ourselves. And what came along is Norman Borlaug, who helped develop crops that were resistant to disease and everything else, and that were more efficient, and that allowed us to continue feeding ourselves. It was human innovation that allows us to grow the way we have in terms of population, and also continue to feed ourselves and keep food prices relatively low. And yes, I'm aware that in other parts of the world, food scarcity is a real problem. And I would argue that a lot of that has probably more to do with politics than it does our actual ability to produce food. But anyway, your point about this seems to me like a new generation of innovation, what you're talking about, where we're going to figure out, just as our forefather, previous generations did, figure out how to use better feeds and better technology. We're also going to figure out how to use better technology to do this stuff better. But that stuff doesn't just happen. There has to be a place where it can happen. We have to set up the conditions where it can happen. We don't necessarily know what something like Grand Farm is going to specifically produce. Am I right? Is my head in the right space about all this? Because it kind of seems like we're creating like a greenhouse where cool new technologies can grow that can help us supply one of the things we all need, which is food. Am I in the right vein here?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. So a couple of things I want to bring up. In the early days of Grand Farm, we thought the first 5 years was going to be about North America, traditional row crops, things that our community, the broader region, would be comfortable with. And then thinking about the ability to impact in the developing world. And yesterday I had that experience. Matur, who's from South Sudan, was talking about the food shortages in his village. And he brought up that there's 1,500 people and they're looking for equipment, and that automation and some of this new technology might increase the likelihood to create productive land. And it may be, Rob, that my earlier comment on less land is inaccurate, because
I wasn't being critical. There's just a lot of ways to think about that.
But opening up new possibilities in new ways. The other part is there's a big promise on Grand Farm. We got energy, excitement, there's people, there's multi portions of an ecosystem involved, elected officials, technologists. Yesterday at Microsoft, there's 80 high school kids talking about AI in agriculture. I believe Grand Farm's work is about increasing the likelihood that good things can happen. And I've always believed if more people know each other, it increases the likelihood that ideas can form, collaboration can occur. Right now in our office, there's 50 people working on a data hub. There's a gentleman from Ukraine working with a woman from Seattle and a startup from from Indiana. We believe that increasing the engagement, the trust, the opportunity, more good things have a higher likelihood of happening. And I've always felt like Grand Farm is the community playing offense. It's taking a risk. It's betting on the future. It's not promising anything is going to happen, but it is increasing the likelihood that good things can continue to happen.
And for context there, the person that Greg referenced was Matur Alir, who grew up in Ethiopia, now helps run a nonprofit to do job placement for the South Sudanese community, amongst others, with the new American population in Fargo. But to his point, we're talking about agriculture here in America, and he's also talking about agricultural problems back where he was coming from originally. And I do think that's very cool too. Greg, for further definition, and I want to bring in Cindy on this as well. Rob hails out of Minot. A lot of his listenership is more of the western north, located in central and western North Dakota. The three of us, frankly, we're on the east side here, and we're on the eastern border of the state. For people who hear about Grand Farm, I actually had a conversation with Lieutenant Governor Tammy Miller yesterday, where we both kind of agreed, do you really think people know kind of the weeds in the weeds details of what Grand Farm is, or do you think it's and we both kind of said, we're kind of afraid right now, to no one's fault, this is kind of a lot of headlines about drone technology on a farm. And so if someone want to can people go visit Grand Farm? Can they go see what their taxpayer dollars are doing? Is it a place? Is it a collection? Is it more of a LLC? Can you give, basically what I'm asking for is, can you give definition to people who are especially outside of the Fargo-Moorhead area, who don't really know what this is, or maybe are hearing about this one for the very first time?
Yeah, of course. So we do a wide variety of activities. So if folks follow along on grandfarm.com or any of the social media channels, they're going to have an opportunity to see what's happening. We do field days similar to North Dakota State University and the Extension Service. There's events, there's activities. Some are private events, some are public events. Folks are more than welcome in those public events to come and see it. Yesterday was it was free to the public from 2 o'clock till 6 o'clock. From 2 to 4, it was kind of our autonomous nation friends, and so the folks from Brazil, and from 4 to 6 was the regional community. And it's just an open environment to see the technology. The building will be built next spring, early summer, and that's where we can do more. Once we have that permanent 365-day-a-year environment, we're going to be able to host a lot more. We believe this is an asset of the region, so we look forward to hosting the Future Farmers of America board meetings and their banquets. We look forward to, folks like Sinner Bresnahan Brothers in Castleton are bringing their international guests. The trade office is sending the ambassadors. We just had the ambassador to Togo recently. There was a 20-person congressional team from across the country doing a regional broadband tour, and we had a chance to host those folks. So I think over time, the public is going to be able to do it. When folks say, oh, nobody's heard of it, and I go, yeah, we're a few years old. We have a team of 8 dedicated to this. We don't have a firm marketing angle. And so So we're in the early days. And remember, this is federal allocation. So it's the federal allocation coming into the state, which is public money. But it's not North Dakota's money. The legislatures were entrusted to decide where to allocate that $1 billion of resources. And we had the opportunity to partner with the state for $10 million.
And just so you know, I'm not saying nobody's heard of it. I'm saying I learned a long time ago in politics, people who don't exist in your world, they got too much going on. So somebody living out in Minot, North Dakota, who's a railroad conductor, they just haven't had time to hear it. And maybe they listen to Rob's podcast. I always approach everything as if it's the very first time anybody's ever hearing about it. So I try and soup to nuts it here.
Yeah.
Well, and I get it. I was just in Minot 2 weeks ago and was blown away by the energy and excitement. Had a chance to eat at a super good restaurant downtown and saw
Was
the
it
Credence
Iron Horse?
Yeah, and then that awesome little coffee shop, kitty corner from there, and I went to this little
Prairie Sky Breaker. Yeah, Minot's got it on, and contrary to Ben's that this podcast is somehow the sole light of illumination for the benighted folks of Minot. Our number one listenership is actually Fargo. It's a statewide audience, and it's apportioned about as you would expect as the state's population is. Cindy, I wanted to, because one thing that, when we start putting public dollars into a project like this, things get political. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean, that's politics are the means through which we govern. Or elect the people who govern. What does the success look at this? And I think Greg makes a really good point. Sometimes you put money in this and you don't know where it's going, right? I mean, you know where the money's going. You don't know what the results are going to be. I mean, the results might not be something that's immediately practical. We might produce a result that becomes useful to somebody 15 years from now who say, oh, the research they did, that's useful because we've had these other developments. As a lawmaker, as a policymaker, what does a win look like when you put public money into a project like this? As somebody who's voting on it, to you, what does a win look like coming out of this?
Oh, that's a pretty deep question, isn't it?
We go deep on this podcast, Cindy.
Yeah, no kidding. So the win is, I think I already see a win when we have the type of individuals that are coming to North Dakota to visit Grand Farm, and some might not be specific that was their goal to visit Grand Farm, but they're being sent there by another entity that they are visiting. I think, and Greg probably can expound on this as well, there's a lot of partnerships that have been formed, and it's kind of the same thing when we give money to or appropriate money to an entity such as the university system, and they're doing research, or, and there's several dollars probably rolling in there too. But it's the measurement, I guess, is sometimes it's very difficult to measure. There's no test score to look at, and I come out of the education arena a lot. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, as far as the board itself, there is a tremendous wealth of knowledge within the board, not speaking necessarily of myself, but Mark Watney is on there, North Dakota Farmers Union, Jessica Fry, and she's with Ag Country. Eric Hardmeyer has agreed to be on the board, formerly CEO at Bank of North Dakota. Ron Holliday, who's a grower. Jake Jornstead, who's bushel, and Taya Fellhawk, that is at Microsoft Tech Park. So then if you look at the partnership that I have to say the team that really works Grand Farm has brought to North Dakota, and Greg can expound on those as well. There are now companies that are signing agreements with Grand Farm, some not to be mentioned at this point, but that brings those companies into North Dakota as well. And we always think maybe it's only Fargo, but it's not. It's it's at Castleton. Castleton has been more than receptive, and there's a lot of things happening at Castleton in the ag arena. Then the plants are there, etc. So what an opportunity for growth, and what an opportunity to experiment right there, right off the interstate.
Well, let's throw it to Greg to expound.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're seeing as the state has invested in a significant amount of opportunities to grow technology, whether it be the investment in Vantis, the investment in Lyft, House Bill 1425. We now have 10 companies that have either relocated or hired staff here in North Dakota because of Grand Farm. This morning, in front of 150 people at Startup Brew, a Kirkland, Washington-based company, and Kirkland's home to the great Kirkland brand, for those that might be familiar with that. They have a robot that can sense and get rid of weeds. So they can put a little robot into a field, sense a weed, destroy the weed, and increase productivity for the farmer. They shared at the end of their speech that later today they're going to look at facilities to put manufacturing here. The other thing I didn't expect was the role of RDO, Titan, Butler, these kind of large equipment dealerships now increasing relationship with the OEMs, John Deere, Case, AGCO, and those larger organizations are paying more attention and engaging more both with us and North Dakota State University. One of the things I'm really excited about is our ability to work with NDSCS in Wahpeton, the folks up at Devil's Lake, their precision ag program, and some of these kind of specialty skill sets that are needed in agriculture that these non-metro or colleges are focused on. It's exciting. I mean, yesterday I was having a great chat with one of the leaders at Bismarck State College, thinking about recruiting some of this talent interested in the technology that goes into the polytechnic strategy.
Greg, I want to take a deep dive into a news item that's come up, and I think maybe people have, and again, it's not disregarding folks, it's just, I think people might have seen the headline, but may not know the full impact. The National Science Foundation gives out grants to innovate. You can speak better at this than I can. My understanding is that there are two essentially levels of these grant applications for what you are doing at Grand Farm, type 1 and type 2, and that type 1 has happened, and that Grand Farm is a finalist for type 2. Can you take a deep dive and kind of let our listeners know where that's at right now? Because I know you're in the final stages of it, and I know that the potential reward is major for our state.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. About 18 months ago, a small group identified a National Science Foundation funding opportunity to consider. There was a $1 million option, which is the phase 1, or there was the level 2, which was for $160 million. The University of North Dakota went after the level 1 and achieved $1 million worth of research to support unmanned systems through kind of the Grand Forks ecosystem. Our team was part of a group that kind of said, hey, let's just go for it. So North Dakota
I apologize, and I was off on the stages.
No problem. North Dakota State University, Grand Farm, our local EDC, and our local chamber applied for an agriculture technology level 2 opportunity. And the level 2 opportunity is up to $160 million. A few weeks ago, we were named one of 16 finalists for this opportunity. 8 of these organizations could be picked for up to $160 million each to focus on research and technology in the agriculture space. We are the only agriculture technology finalists. We beat out the University of Illinois, Iowa State. I think the University of Minnesota is the only kind of central portion of the U.S. that has an application. Theirs is a plastic technology grant. So the team has a site visit from the National Science Foundation later in September. It's a very competitive process. And our team has always approached these big federal grants as a great opportunity to clarify who we are, increase collaboration, and regardless of outcome, continue to move things forward. And so we're optimistic, we're hopeful. There's been tremendous leadership at NDSU and the local EDC, the local chamber, to really work together to put our region in a position to be nationally competitive.
Greg, Cindy, I appreciate you both coming on. I got to say, I mean, sometimes I think I have a reputation as the guy who shows up when things are going bad, when things are going wrong, and that is a lot of the job sometimes, right? What's the old saying? Safe airplane landings don't make news. I like sometimes talking about things that are working in North Dakota. I should probably talk about them more. This is exciting stuff that's happening in North Dakota. So much of our challenge is overcoming this idea that North Dakota is a backwater, or that there's not innovative, exciting things that are happening. This is cutting edge. This is bleeding edge. And our legislature has the foresight to put an appropriate level of investment in it. We have some tolerance for the idea that, this is not, there are no guarantees here. We're talking about research. We're talking about cutting edge. This is such a good thing. I'm glad that it's happening. I'm glad that we're taking some risks here. And I really appreciate you both coming on to talk about it.
Well, thank you, Rob and Ben. And, to your listeners, on September 13th, we are going to introduce a big news item. We got, just like we're very inspired by Grand Sky and Grand Forks. And just when they got General Atomics to come to their community, we're going to be announcing a pretty big deal that I think the region's going to feel good about. So September 13th, you're all invited. Rob, we got great internet powered by DCN, so you can do your show from anywhere. We'd love to have you do it out in the field, bush light in hand, delighting the guests.
Well,
He should go to the Space One in Grand Forks. I'll talk to him about that, Greg.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get me out of Minot, but I appreciate it. Thank you both for being on.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
I really meant what I said at the end of that interview about it being a fun thing to talk about. I know it's not as salacious sometimes or as provocative as some of the things we're talking about, but stuff like that. I mean, first of all, it's a political risk to put money into this. There's always that risk that people are going to come back and say, well, we squandered all this money. What did we get for it? We spent millions, and what did we get for it? I mean, you have to have if you're going to get into some of this stuff, you're going to have some tolerance for failure or for things not turning out. And that's not me saying that this stuff's going to fail. I'm just saying you can't start a skunk works, which is what this is, where we're just trying to get smart people together to see what they come up with without finding out they're going to come up with a lot of stuff sometimes that doesn't work before they find the really good stuff that does work. So,
and any good investor will tell you have to have a diversified portfolio because at the end of the day, something is going to fail. And it's part of a bigger conversation I think we definitely need to keep having nationally. I wish it would come up during the presidential election next year, and I'm guessing it won't because the contest has become very shallow, but we need on a national level to invest way more in research because to your point during what you said to Greg about moving away from getting away from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of innovation and being able to kind of take our destiny in our own hands. The only way you do that is by advancing technology.
Yeah.
And sometimes it needs to not necessarily immediately be for profit. You need some incubation to move that into a profitable private sector business. We've seen it again and again with military technology, with NASA technology going into consumer products. It's proven.
I think sometimes there's this tendency where we look at maybe a looming problem, whether it's like climate change or whether it's like food scarcity, and we look at these problems and we just resign ourselves to them, right? Because that's kind of the easy thing. Well, we have to limit humanity, and we have to put all these restrictions on ourselves because this problem is looming. When instead we could use human innovation to address the problems. In this instance, we can use human innovation to get better at farming for Americans, but also from people all over the world. We can use, talk about like carbon capture, for instance. We can use human ingenuity to mitigate our impact on the climate so that we can control it. And hopefully we'll get to a point where it's as controllable as like a thermostat, and we can just decide where we want to set it. I feel like that is within our potential. I think we can do it. We can do these things, but we have to have the foresight to do them. And listen, I mean, talking about this specifically, anything that we're spending $10 million. We appropriated $10 million so that we have a place where smart people who are on the cutting edge of what is traditionally North Dakota's most important industry, agriculture, who are coming from all over the country, who are coming from all over the world, to work and learn and research in North Dakota. How is that? I mean, that to me, that's a win. That's a win even before we get to anything else. So I'm for it.
I am too. I think you need transparency to discover, what is the metric for, and like you're saying, what the metric for success doesn't necessarily mean something pops out right away. I'm all in favor of it too. I'm glad there's an embrace of this kind of public investment, despite what I viewed as a lot of public rhetoric against it from, some, I'd say probably some factions of the GOP at this point. And there are factions of
the GOP that are against pretty much everything. So
speaking of,
good transition. See, you're getting good at this stuff, Ben. Yeah, nice segue. Yeah. Speaking of, let's talk about this new ballot measure that dropped yesterday, which I described in a headline as a campaign to make voting in North Dakota more difficult and elections more expensive. Now, if you've read a headline about this, you probably saw it. It's about election integrity, or it's about early voting. And yes, the proponents of the measure would probably say it's about election integrity, although I think that's baloney. And yes, part of it does deal with early voting, but there's a lot going on here. Yes, the measure would ban nearly all early voting except through absentee ballots. Voting by mail, which, by the way, has been standard practice in rural North Dakota for decades.
Let's do it. Yeah,
would be prohibited. I'm gonna run through and just do a summary.
Yeah, do a checklist and then we'll do it.
Right. Every county would have to have a polling place open in every precinct, and I understand.
On paper, we can get into the context.
On paper, that sounds good. But if you're talking about some of these rural districts, you're going to be opening a precinct that 3 people are going to vote at. And that's going to be hugely expensive. And by the way, we already have a shortage of election workers. So we're going to...
I'm sorry. You're going to do the checklist. I'm so hopping about this. I'm too excited about it that
Yeah. The measure would mandate the use of paper ballots, except that we already do that. I mean, even if you're in a part of the state that's voting, when I get a ballot here in Minot, I get a paper and a pen, and I fill in the little circles, and then I scan it. But I have a paper ballot that exists. Even if you're in some parts of the state, you vote on a touch screen, and even if you're doing that, it still produces a paper ballot.
So in Cass County, we have the electronic touch screens, which you can choose to use. You can choose to use a paper ballot. I have done both just to see what both would be like. And as you said, Rob, the only thing the touch screen does is let you hit it up electronically, and then it prints out your ballot, and you can literally physically see with the paper in your hand all of your votes, and then you put that into the scanner, and it tallies your vote.
And if something's not right, there's a mechanism where you can go to an election worker and you can get a new ballot and start the process over.
Which by the way, I have never ever had either A, the touchscreen not work, or B, the printed ballot ever be inaccurate. And I've never heard of anyone say the printed ballot from the touchscreen is ever inaccurate. And frankly, I talked to a lot of people in politics in Cass County. If it was happening, I understand I'm not omnipresent, but I would really suppose I would have heard about it at this point.
This measure requires that the state keep ballots on hand for 6 years. Well, we already keep them for almost 2 years. I'm not sure what's going to happen in those 4 additional years that are going to make those ballots more important. I mean, we pretty much already keep them until the next election. So I don't know. Our vote tabulators, I mean, there's a thing in there about not connecting our vote tabulators to the internet. They're already not connected to the internet. There's a prohibition on using state using any private money to run elections. That prohibition is already in law. There's a prohibition on mass mailing ballots. Our state has never mass mailed ballots. Even during the pandemic, the only thing that was mailed out was a form to request an absentee ballot. Those are pretty special circumstances, but nobody was mass mailed a ballot. But this isn't just about elections. This is the point I'm getting into. This is about a lot of other stuff too. It's about ballot access. Any candidate representing any political party can place their name on the ballot simply by paying a $150 fee. Right now, you have to go out and collect a couple of hundred signatures. This basically, it's pay to play. You could just pay $150. Well, hold on, Ben. Let me get through this. It also lengthens the amount of time to gather signatures for audit or recall petitions to 1 year. Referenda and ballot measures would have 3 years. 3 years they could collect signatures if they wanted to amend or put a ballot measure on the ballot. And this, by the way, this gets really, really weird. The measure requires all petitions to be circulated. So we're talking about a petition to recall an elected official or to put a statutory measure or a constitutional amendment on the ballot. It says that the only people who could circulate them are United States citizens or quote unquote sovereign individuals. Now, you tell me what that means, because I'm pretty sure that's an allusion to the sovereign citizen movement. That's like Gordon Call stuff. That's like, I'm a sovereign citizen and I think the government's illegal, so I don't have to pay my taxes, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. I was not familiar with that term.
Yeah, that's super weird. Although petitioners would not have to be North Dakota citizens. Petitioners would be allowed to be paid by the signature, so that's currently prohibited by law. The measure would allow election results to be thrown out and a new election held based on nothing more than a, quote, preponderance of evidence, which is a very low bar and frankly would create a situation where we could have election results thrown out pretty routinely. People collecting signatures would have no criminal or civil liability for their actions while circulating a petition, which is an open invitation for fraud. Petitioners would feel free to could work basically on any public property with no restrictions of any type, which I'm sorry is an open invitation for harassment. And the measure would prohibit the legislature from initiating a ballot measure to amend the state constitution, meaning the only way our Constitution could be amended would be through a ballot measure campaign that, per some of the provisions I just mentioned, would allow people to basically pay their way onto the ballot while having no civil or criminal liability for any fraud committed along the way. And there's more in this measure even than that. But I mean, and by the way, if you want to read the whole thing, you should go read the whole thing. But Ben,
absolutely,
I'm sorry, this thing is nuts.
So they want to turn our state into California, is how I read that.
Oh, no. Well, worse than California.
Where's that?
Far worse than California.
Yeah, actually worse than California. Because in California, pretty much a lot of public policy has to be done via ballot measure because of how broken the legislature and the power of the governor is. And they pretty much put everything up to statewide votes. So they have 60 regularly propositions to vote on, statewide ballot measures, where a California citizen has to sit and read through a bunch of legalese, trying to understand what does this mean, what's this part of, and essentially makes every citizen a part-time legislator every election day, which is a horrible, it's literally the opposite of a republic. It's the exact opposite of what the founding fathers wanted. Breaking down a couple, I want to give context points to some of the first items and sure, keep going down. First off, ending early voting. Why? It has never, ever been a problem. There has never been a problem with it in the state. There has never been anything recorded that makes it worse. It helps working families, people who have jobs during the day on a Tuesday that work from 9 to 5. And you know what? Some people work 10 hours a day. Some people work 8 hours a day and then have kids they need to pick up or are taking care of an elderly parent or something else is going on in their life. Having a 2-week window, so what we did in Cass County for a long time was we had a 2-week window where there were 3 hotels usually that the lobbies were open up, and you had to do everything you have to do to vote legally. Show your ID, tell them whatever it is, and your name goes in a database, and once you vote and once you submit your ballot, then your name's taken out, and if you showed up on election day to try to vote again, they'd say, whoa, no, your name shows that you have already voted here. What's going on? But they didn't even really have to do that because no one really tries to vote twice. I'm sorry, that's just not been a thing. That's not been documented. There aren't any instances of it. What early voting has done is opened up access to the ballot box.
We shouldn't say that there aren't any instances of people trying to double vote. They are relatively rare. They have never swung an election, but it does happen.
In North Dakota?
Yes, it has happened.
Wouldn't there be police reports? Okay, I haven't seen those.
Somebody was actually convicted just a few years ago for it. But
I haven't seen that.
I mean, it's
okay. But in that case, they got convicted.
I'm just saying never. Right. It was caught and was convicted. I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying never say never. It does happen. Okay. It's just
mail by voting. There are counties in North Dakota. Rob, do you know how many that solely vote by mail?
More than 10. I'm pretty sure it's more than 10. Yeah.
So 53 counties, about a fifth of them roughly, vote solely by mail, which was their choice and their intention, by the way, because places like Golden Valley, North Dakota, County, North Dakota, have 2,000 people in it, and driving all over Kingdom Come to get to somewhere in November, which might have a blizzard because it's North Dakota, is silly.
Right.
And they've chosen to do this, and it's never been a problem. There are whole states that vote by mail, or these blue states. Some of them are Utah.
Right.
So these things these have worked just fine in the past. But what the bottom line part that really frustrates me is this is clearly coming from the more Trumpian worry about election, paranoia about election fraud, conspiracy theory wing that has not been losing any elections in North Dakota. So they're going out of their way to fix, quote unquote, in my mind, create way more problems for citizens in a state where their partisan stripe and their particular brand within the Republican Party in this case have been winning elections consistently. If you look at the bills being sponsored by the legislature, if you look at the candidates being ran right now, and the last one I wanted to jump into was a vote by mail. Oh, every precinct having a polling place. Now that sounds really good on paper. And that's something that Jim Casper, representative from South Fargo, which is my district, has been pushing for a long time. And I remember when I was in the legislature, he introduced that bill, and I was very interested in it because I thought it made a lot of sense to have a nearby polling place to give you access. But I had to get some context and get some education because I'm from Fargo. And in Fargo, we used to have every precinct had a polling place, which wasn't that hard because, for instance, in District 46 goes from, I think, 32nd Avenue to 52nd Avenue. I understand these are just avenues, but point being, it's 20 blocks. Having 3 precinct places open, having places where you could literally walk to your precinct, that's great. But if you live out in McKenzie County, or if you live out, if you like outside of Towner, North Dakota, and everyone has to have a precinct, like you said, Rob, you have to have a volunteer. Government money must be spent to have that office open, and you have to have someone there to make sure the elections are secure. Well, we don't have the resources for it.
I mean, just if we can bring up a contradiction here on this, I mean, also being circulated is a ballot measure to eliminate property taxes because people think their local taxes are too high. What do you think is going to happen when you put these onerous new requirements on local governments? Now, listen, I think elections are something we can spend some money on if it's going to make it easier to vote. But let's be efficient about it. We don't need to. I mean, creating a mandate that every precinct. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to have a voting. Like you can facilitate easy access to the polls without having a voting place in every single precinct. Sometimes some precincts, depending on where you're at, that just doesn't make a bit of sense. And again, we have counties that do almost entirely vote by mail. Like they'll have one in-person voting precinct open, like in the county seat, and then the rest is vote by mail. So if you want to go vote in person, you can, or you can vote by mail because it's reliable, and we've literally been doing it for decades, and we don't have a problem.
And by the way, people who are not necessarily mobile, especially the elderly who might be living in an assisted care facility who are still able and should be able to vote, almost entirely vote by mail.
Yeah.
And if you do this, you're essentially going to take away their right to vote by mail, which is there's going to be some people responding to me saying, oh, wah, you don't think we can get people to the polls. Well, you know what? It's not always easy to, and their right to vote should not go away because you've made this decision.
That's the other thing, like saying we can only, because part of this is we can only vote on election day, right? Well, what happens if there's a blizzard? It doesn't matter how many precincts we have up. What if we have a November blizzard? Now the election's going to swing. Maybe a Democrat gets elected on the statewide ballot because Western North Dakota gets decimated by a blizzard. People can't show up on election day, but the roads in Fargo are clear, and Fargo votes, and now there's a does anyone? I don't want that. I don't think Democrats should want that.
There's not, and Democrats shouldn't want that. But like as a hypothetical, in 2018. I don't know, but say there was an absolute wipeout blizzard in the western third of the state, and you could only vote on election day, and Grand Forks and Fargo got to turn out in full, and Richland County, where a lot of the Heitkamps are from, got maybe Heidi Heitkamp is still the U.S. Senator from North Dakota.
Yeah,
it's just hypothetical.
Why should we don't want elections settled by the
by the
weather.
Way, no corruption on her part.
Right,
just weather.
Right,
just weather.
Why the weather shouldn't be deciding elections for Republicans or Democrats or Libertarians or anybody else. It shouldn't be a factor. I mean, we can protect from it being a factor by allowing vote by mail, absentee voting, and early voting.
It is beyond rich that this thing, it buries the lead. This ballot measure is to get rid of any criminal liability from people that want to be sneaky about the way they put on ballot measures in the state of North Dakota, and it's disguising itself as an anti-corruption bill. It is covering itself up in false honor to cover up what people want to do. And Rob, do you have the names behind this ballot measure?
Well, I mean, the person leading it is a woman by the name. I mean, by the way, the sponsoring committee is huge. The woman is a woman by the name of Lydia Gessel. She's a chairman. Okay. She's from Chaskey, North Dakota. Apparently, she's pretty well known to lawmakers, but there's a lot of very recognizable names on here. Paul Sorum, Michael Coachman. Coachman has run for various statewide offices. Sorum has run for various statewide offices. There's 3 lawmakers: State Representative Scott Deek from Williston, State Representative Jeff Hoverson from Minot, Representative Jeff Magrum from Hazleton. They're all Republicans. But the thing is, to your point, if this is about integrity, then why do we have a protection in there for civil and criminal liability for people who are circulating petitions?
That sure is odd. I wonder why you'd need cover for criminal conduct if you're not committing any crimes.
Yeah. I don't know.
So let's take a deep dive into, because I'm not being facetious when I say I truly actually don't understand the $150 to be a candidate. Can you, if you understand this, can you break it down for me? If I want to run for an office and represent whatever political party, if I pay my $150, does that put me on the primary ballot, or can I do this and then get myself on the general no matter who won the primary?
I don't know. Well, I mean, because it's always been that way. So the way it works now is essentially the state parties have a nominating convention, and delegates from all around the state show up at the convention, and then whoever wins at the convention, the state party sends I'm not sure, basically sends paperwork to the Secretary of State's office saying these people.
I've done it.
Yeah, right. Well, I know. I'm explaining it for the audience.
Sure.
These people won the nomination at the convention, and then they automatically get to be on the June primary ballot. Now, if there are other Republicans or other Democrats, as the case may be, who want to be on it, they could collect some signatures and put themselves on the primary ballot. And then in the general, you could collect signatures and put yourself on the general election ballot as an independent by collecting signatures. Essentially, this would replace the signature collection process where you just pay $150 to the state, and then you can be on the ballot, and you don't have to have anybody else, which is a good way, I think, to litter our ballot with a bunch of cranks who didn't even have to get the sign off from a nominal number of North Dakotans to get on the ballot. And by the way, when I'm saying collecting signatures, it's not a huge number of signatures. It's like I think it's like 200 or 250. I'm forgetting.
It's a percentage of the people who voted for the political party of the person who ran for governor. It's like if you're running for so
it's like
it winds
200
up
to
being
300
300 votes.
It's 200 or 300 signatures.
So in the past, for the most part, once you got nominated at your district convention, most people said, God bless you for being crazy enough to run for the legislature, and you just went through the primary, and then your real election was what I think most people would like our elections to be about, was the Republican and the Democrat, maybe a third party person, all running against each other in the general election, and hopefully having a contest of ideas, and may the person who works the hardest win. Was not the case, but that's the theory. Then, now that the Republicans have become so very dominant in the state, we're seeing more and more primary challenges. But for listeners, that's within the chronology of after the convention for the nomination. Then we go to the primary in June. That's when we're talking about. What I'm wondering is, and what I could see these kind of bill sponsors, or these ballot measure sponsors wanting is, if you could enshrine it in law that after the primary, you can pay $150 and get on the general election ballot to be any party you want, they can then run whatever Tea Party, Trumpy, whatever. I
don't think they'd be able to do that, because once the primary is over, you can only get on the general election ballot as an independent. And by the way, under state law, and I don't see anywhere where this measure changes it. Under current law, if you lost on the June ballot, you can't be on the general election ballot at all, which by the way is why I think Rick Becker skipped the June. Remember last year he lost at the state convention, and then he didn't put his name on the June primary, and then he gathered the signatures to put his name on the general election ballot as an independent. I think he went that route because if he had lost to Hoven in the June primary, which I absolutely expect he would have, he couldn't have gone on the general election ballot.
What you're saying makes sense. And I hope that then holds out to be true no matter what happens with this ballot measure. What I could see these folks doing, because these come from a very, I would say they would agree that they're coming from a Rick Becker stripe within the GOP, that they would like the ability to get their names on the ballot. And there'd be, after the June primary, and there would be so many shenanigans, so many troll, unserious candidates jumping in at that point for every party under the sun.
Well, they could see your point of being about. Listen, North Dakota voters are busy. We have a filtering process for who ultimately ends up on the general election ballot for a reason. Like, there has to be some buy-in. If we change the law so that any candidate who can muster $150 can be on the ballot. Any Yahoo, and then the ballot measure process is basically wide open to fraud, where you can just buy your way on the ballot there. Our ballots are going to be pages and pages long. Is that what we want as North Dakotans?
And if you want to get cute about it, I don't know if there's any state law. No, there actually is not any state laws about you running for multiple offices. What would stop me next year? Now, the ballot measure in theory would be on the ballot next year, so this couldn't happen. But say it was in place, and say my fears were right about the primary election, there'd be nothing stopping me from setting aside $450 and being the simultaneous one of the Republican nominees for governor, Congress, and Senate. All Ben Hanson tickets up and down for the Republican option statewide. I don't want to do that. Nobody wants that. I mean, but I'm using it as a hypothetical for how extremely stupid it could get very quickly.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, let's zoom out and ask what problem are we fixing here?
And this is,
I mean, is there any evidence that the election,
No.
and I mean, even if you believe the 2020 election lie, which I do not, but let's be honest, that's what's motivating this, right? Or the idea that there was election fraud and the
which I love
election,
because
the
Trump
national
overwhelmingly
election
run the state. So again,
Right.
even if you believe it, I don't know what problem you're solving.
the national, like the idea that this national election was stolen from Donald Trump, I mean, is absolutely nonsense. But even if you buy into that, where's the indication that there was a problem in North Dakota, which went overwhelmingly for Trump? So I don't understand what we're even trying to solve in terms of a problem in North Dakota. I think we have very good elections in North Dakota. I don't think we have a problem.
I completely agree with that. Much like it reminds me of when we were talking about conspiracy theories about kitty litter boxes in schools or whatever. When you allow the temperature to get so hot and put out these hysterical accusations, you really do a disservice to our local communities and people who do unglamorous work, working 12-hour shifts on election day, or school teachers or custodial staff in our public school systems. Why do you love poking at community members in North Dakota so hard? And just to yell into the void, as I love to do, what can I say? I'm a North Dakota Democrat, but in any state, doesn't matter if it's North Dakota or anywhere else, there are a whole lot of public policy issues that need to be solved and need to be worked on, and the public needs to be made aware of them at all times. I could, the favorite ones I like to name off are like what should be the definition of the future of higher ed, insulin prices and prescription prices. If you want to, if you're coming from the right side, why not talk about whatever regulations there? Why aren't you out there doing a ballot measure to eliminate income tax?
Well, one of the things like election security is, I think there's a valid thing. We had a debate over voter ID, right? And Democrats didn't like voter ID very much. And every time Republicans would say, hey, maybe you should show a driver's license or a government issued ID,
I don't like the way they changed it very much.
It was voter suppression and everything else, which I think was irresponsible of people on the left. When Heidi Heitkamp needed a talking point for why she lost in 2018, she tried to say it was because the legislature suppressed the vote in North Dakota. Baloney. Turnout, and specifically suppressed the Native American vote, which was baloney because the Native American vote turned out in 2018 in numbers not seen before, and she still lost by a healthy margin. So listen, this stuff where people say politically convenient things because they don't want to have to admit that you just lost the election has been happening on both sides for a while, and it's got to stop.
My point with these signature gatherers is these ballot measure sponsors is they clearly have a lot of time on their hands. They're interested in public policy. Would it kill you to work on something that's real? Like I said, I was giving mostly lefty examples, but like I was at the Grand Farm event yesterday. I was talking to somebody who owns a drone business in Texas. He's very interested in potentially locating up here, but he asked me, do you guys have corporate income tax? And I said, we do, and it's very flat and very low. And he goes, oh, well, in Texas, we don't have any, so maybe I would just do a satellite office here. Okay, do a big ballot measure about that. Something about would I agree with it necessarily?
That's a real debate. That's a real debate.
A real public policy debate.
That's an important debate to have. That's an important question. This is nonsense. And by the way, just to give you an idea of what this opens the door to. One part of it says that if this is subsection T of the ballot measure, I'm quoting, if a preponderance of evidence exists that indicates tampering was possible or likely in an election, a special election will be conducted within 60 days to replace the defective election and remedy the alleged tampering. They're saying if it was just possible, well, for crying out loud, anything is possible. Hold on, Ben. Hold on.
Yeah.
There's another part where this is subsection I. It says any qualified elector, upon providing a preponderance of evidence of voter fraud or election fraud, may submit a written request to the North Dakota auditor to perform a full forensic audit on any election results. The auditor, upon receiving such a written request and evidence, must perform the requested audit, and the audit must begin within 14 days of receiving the petition. So those two things alone, any citizen, based on a low evidentiary standard, can either get an entire election thrown out and hold up a new one, or get the auditor involved. So if we're auditing the election results, that means the election results are not finalized, which means the person we elected is not going to sit in office. In North Dakota, we hold the legislative session a couple of months after Election Day. The Election Day is in November. The legislature starts in early January. So what do you think's gonna? This is a recipe for flipping chaos, where any crank can get an election thrown out, and based on almost nothing.
And I'll bet the bill sponsors are the kind of people that if you asked them, they'd say they're really against frivolous lawsuits and we need tort reform and and yet they are trying to enshrine in state law a system where any one person standing up and pointing a finger can call an entire election and throw you, the listeners, voters, completely out based on whatever weird conspiracy theories they decide to have that day. So here's how I predict they'd like to use that.
What if a liberal uses this, right? 'Cause that's the big thing when I hear.
Oh, they will.
When I hear
there are cranks on both sides. Sure. Everybody. When
I hear Trumpists talk all the time about how Mike Pence had the authority to throw out the 2020 elections or to stall that process or whatever baloney argument they're making. Could Kamala Harris do that in 2025? Yeah. January 2025? Could she be sitting there as vice president of the United States still and throw out the results if they don't like them?
No, I'm one person. I'm going to throw out the entire nation's ballots.
No, the vice president doesn't have that authority.
In the world. Yeah. I'm agreeing with you. But I could see that. What I envision that the ballot measure sponsors, to be fair, I have not talked to any of them. And if any of them would be willing to come on, I would love to have them on the show. I would envision them using this to do things like I'm seeing in District 46 where I live, and I hope she doesn't mind me name checking her, but the new GOP chair here, district chair here, has openly stated he doesn't like Shannon Wars-Jones's votes, and I think he's going to use this. If they can't primary her or unnominate her out of getting reelected, they're going to try and they would envision using this in a general ballot. Now, the timeline doesn't work because it has to be on the timeline. But that's an example of what they're going to try and do. And I could also see, by the way, I'm sorry, I agree with you. There's probably be liberals that would use this too. There are a handful of liberal districts in North Dakota that consistently elect Democrats. What's stopping a conspiracy theorist crank in downtown Fargo from going up to the District 21 election and saying they elected 3 Democrats again, like they have for the last 500 years? I say there's ballot tampering, and then keeping them from being able to even vote in their 1/5 of the legislative caucus, just to keep any Democrats out of the legislature. I'm sorry, I could see that happening.
Or Democrats in Williston doing the same thing to try to tamp
we're out
down
of power. Yeah, let's just throw bombs. Who cares?
Right, and that's the thing is this because I really obviously the people who are behind this measure have a very specific ideology and a very specific agenda, and they think this is going to further it. But our analysis of this should be agenda free. It doesn't matter if your goal is to elect Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or libertarians. It doesn't matter if you want to pass get rid of property taxes on the ballot. It doesn't matter what your agenda is. We all pursue our political agendas through a process, and that process needs to be fair, it needs to be accessible, and it needs to be protected from bad actors who would come in and abuse the process. What this does, in a very short-sighted way, is it opens up our process, not just for elections, but also for initiated measures, to fraud and to chaos, not born of actual legitimate concerns about fraud or problems, but just because people don't like the outcome. This is such a Pandora's box. I hope this does not get traction. I hope North Dakotans see it for the tomfoolery it is. And I hope you enjoyed listening to this show, because we have to stop it. We're just over an hour, and I have been told that an hour is about the perfect time that people want to listen to a podcast like this. So we're going to stop it there. We're gonna have much more to say about this as time goes on. And I encourage you, by the way, to go and to go and read the ballot measure itself. It's up in my column. Again, my headline is the campaign to make voting in North Dakota more difficult and elections more expensive. But don't believe my analysis of it. Go read it yourself. And I think you're going to find that it's a lot of nonsense. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.